Yeah, one of the big questions for some people interested in woodland development and what woodland was like in Britain, and it's always subject to huge debate. It swings from one end of the spectrum to the other. Was Britain very wooded in the past, or let's talk about England and the southeast particularly, was the southeast very wooded in the past until relatively recently or not? And the old idea, you could get on at Land's End and walk to the tip of Scotland on the treetop, on trees all the way if you were a squirrel, is certainly not true. On the other hand, the modern view, which is being put forward now, that there was far less woodland in the past than there actually was, is also not true. The truth is somewhere in between, and we certainly had a lot of wildwood in what I would call wildwood, that high dark forest, relatively uninterfered with by people, until we had at least pockets of it, and sizable pockets of it, until in this region, the middle of the 13th century. And I can show you bits of it. This is one bit recently excavated from the Marlow site in Canterbury. Now, honestly, you won't catch anything from these. You can touch them. There's no chemicals on them. This is, perhaps I should explain first, this is a radially split board. I can't demonstrate that for you today, but maybe I can just find quickly a picture. I don't know how many of you have done cleaving of timber. Oh, here, this will do. Radial cleaving of timber involves, here I'll hold this one up, starting with big straight logs of timber like oak. You split the timber in half, into quarters, into eighths, into 16ths, into 32nds. This is a 32nd split. If it's straight enough, you can go down to 64ths or 128ths, which is what that is there. I'll explain that in a minute. But you do need straight grain timber and a little bit of skill and luck. And ideally, to make a board that size, you need a tree about this in diameter. Now, if you now have a look at the end of it, does everyone understand the basic processes? Okay. There's pictures of us doing it well, it's the top picture there really. We're making 32nd splits. The bottom is splitting a smaller log in half, just using wooden wedges. That's in Woodland in Kent, in Bromley, in northwest Kent. You can use woodland trees, carefully selected to a coppice with standards of decent size, but the old wildwood provided lots of timber of that type, of oak, beech and ash. Mainly oak was used like this, and this is an offcut from a river wall in Canterbury. Now, if you want to have a look at the end here, this is where we took the tree ring sample. We know it was reused in 1123, and these are the rings. See how close they are together? I don't know whether anyone wants that to look.
Date you gave, Dave?
Yeah, 1123 AD. Not sure. I can't tell you whether it's spring or not, but it's if you've got the outside of the tree, which in this case was just missing, but it was reused with other bits that did have it, then you can date to the season. So not the year. You'll often hear people say, "Oh, we can date to the year." That's wrong. You date to the season. So sometimes it might be 1122 to 3. If it was a dormant winter period or whatever, so you're dating to the season, if it works, and it does normally if you've got more than 45 rings. So there, if you want to have a look, there's the rings. They're very close together, about 2 millimeters apart. This parent tree, as we call it, is about 270 years old. So if any of you read about the classic works on wildwood, temperate wildwood by Piesekin or whatever, he'll say that we would expect temperate wildwood to be dominated by trees about a metre in diameter at chest height, and around 200, say 180 to 250 years old, something like that. And that's exactly what we find. Now, before he published that, we were already telling people that from the archaeological evidence, and we had reached the same conclusions without knowing of his survey work. So I'm pretty sure that this is correct. Now, you will hear people today, some of them quite famous, who work in Windsor Great Park, telling people, oh, the woodland wasn't very dense, there wasn't much wildwood, it was all open with big animals all around. That just isn't the case. If it was, we wouldn't dig this sort of stuff up all over England. Recently, a colleague of mine has been digging up boat planking made from this kind of oak, this wildwood oak, or old growth oak if you're North American, in the north, and he's got some which is mid-14th century, which is not imported from the great forests of southeast Baltic or anywhere, but is actually native. We can tell that from the tree ring patterns. which are distinct to regions, as late as the middle of the 14th century.
So were they growing them to a certain size?
No, they're not growing them, they are growing themselves. The whole point is...
Yeah, well, they are growing themselves, but did they, I mean, if they're 250 years old, were there enough trees to go around for all the...
This is, if you like, a sample of the Normalisation of England. These people are cutting down big areas of what they would have called waste, or we would if it was in English, or possibly... what was it, the silver pastoralis, maybe some areas will be gradually cleared. In some areas we have evidence of, along the Thames estuary, much more intensive use of woodland, and where there's a few wildwood trees still growing, say in the Middle Saxon period. Most of the trees are young, quick growing, sort of thing you'd find on better land around here, but in this sort of size. But there are a few big old trees that are in the process of dying, so they've got woodworm in them and all kinds of things, and they split them up until they disappear, and they're left only with the young, fast-growing woodland oaks, managed woodland oaks, and hedgerow trees and things like that. But you can do the same thing with trees if you can find a straight enough one with those trees, but you do have to find a straight enough one, and what happens through time is the boards get shorter and shorter. I mean, some of these boards, in England, I don't think we've got any over about, probably about 5 or 6 metres long. But in the Baltic areas, they get them up South Baltic, they can be up to 10 metres long, and they're generally 16 splits and reduced more by chopping down. But I mean, it's incredible quality timber. If you ever go to Gdansk Maritime Museum, you'll see this is a big timber exporting area. You'll see oak boards there which are flawless and over 5 metres long at the end of the medieval period. So, and then in fact they're still exporting it as late as the 18th century. It's like American white oaks coming from the other side of the Atlantic, similar quality stuff. We've got some timber in London. The Americans were exporting timber to the southeast of Britain as early as 1609, or the British settlers were. The first Virginia timber came up the River Thames in 1609. And we've got a 3-storey high set of timbers from the Middle Temple in London, 3-storey high oak posts which are about 1/8 of a tree. And they're from 350-year-old tree oaks. And I said to our dendrochronologist, who still worked for the museum then, now he works freelance, he went to Sheffield and now he's freelance, I think this could be American, because I don't think we have any trees like that in England at that time, which is the 17th century for the building. And he said, no, but he thinks it is now, because you can't match it against anything. And you only need 45 rings there to match against some chronology somewhere in Europe.
Is that standard throughout, 45 rings?
Well, they would prefer more, but 45 is your minimum, unless you're in the Roman period in London where you could take it down to about 40. 42, because the sequences are so good. So I'm not going to talk about periods very much. There's no time today to do that. I just want to give you a flavour of the sort of stuff we dig up. So that's a raw board. Hasn't been trimmed for anything. It's only been cut. It's got an axe cut end here. It's got a sawn end there where we took the sample. We don't just dig up oak.
And
yep.
Do you think these were felled by axe or by saw?
Well, at this period, 1123, they're not using saws for anything.
Okay.
Let me just... There's no time, but I'll just flash up the kind of thing. We produce lots of big tomes on these things.
Yeah.
You can read about tree writing, which is woodworking after the Romans and before the Normans. You can read about Roman woodworking there.
Can we bring those in the tea time, so if anybody wants to take a reference of them, we can, please.
I mean, that's just a sample. This is the new one that's just come out. For those of you prehistorically inclined, lovely woodland pictures in here by sedimentologist for Oxford Archaeology, but I worked on the woodwork for this project. This is almost in Kent. It's just on the south shore of the Essex side where the A13 was being extended, a group of sites along there. So there's a bit of Alder Carr with a beaver stream running through it. We've got a nice beaver dam there, and there's pictures of trees and reconstruction drawings which are rather nice. Woodland at different times when, just to give you an idea, this is a lovely analogue for some of the early woodland in sort of Arctic, subarctic conditions, growing along the northern side of the Thames, where the River Lee would run into the river. So there's lots and lots of information on woodland. One of the other key points about that is that there's no such thing as wildwood, as some people conceive it, a static thing. It changes all the time. And so the idea that you'd ever be able to replicate it over a 200 or 300 year period, you might be able to replicate one phase or period, but depending on the climate, and maybe disease going through, all these things happen. I mean, talking of disease briefly, I'll just show you that elm does survive, not as well as oak. There's an elm boat plank of the 16th century from London. This stuff's sawn. They're using saws a lot by then. You can just see the saw marks there. The eye. There's a bit of white lead paint. It's hard to see now, it's almost rubbed off. These lines across here are pixel marked. You can't cleave elm this size reliably into boards. Anyway, so elm does survive, but we don't get any Roman elm, we don't get any Saxon elm, which I think is really interesting in the London region. None at all. So that's got to be Dutch elm disease, or something similar.
There's also an elm disease in prehistory, isn't there? There's
elm
some
decline.
Elm
Which,
decline.
well, people don't know
But
whether
they think that could have been caused by.
Yes, or possibly leaf hay. If you go to Finland or Sweden, they make a lot of hay out of tree leaves, and they use elm a lot for that. But
It's very tasty.
I don't think that's a lot. I think it's more likely disease myself, because we get no Roman elm, we get no Saxon elm. So the Roman elm piles under Rochester Bridge I'm very suspicious of, because we don't have any. We dug a site just in Essex by the Dartford crossing. Elm piles there, mixed up with Roman saltwork. I didn't like them at all, and they were very solid. They're 14th century AD, they're nothing to do with the Romans. So it really is reliable. And when the sort of quantities of timber we're digging up, say, in London is really probably the best place in the whole of the world for digging up timber from the Roman period onwards, and to some extent even prehistory, because we get such a range, and we get it from so many different cultures and contexts. And we're talking about hundreds of tons over the last 30 years, not just 100 pieces, So these generalisations I'm spouting off here are not based on what you can see on the table. They're based on, 100 times that, literally.
And presumably it's the waterlogged
Yeah,
context
they're all
in which they're
preserved by
found for
waterlogging.
people who don't really understand.
Yeah,
yes.
they're all preserved. Water is the best preservative you can have, but we couldn't live in the place that's preserved this, because there's no oxygen at all. Okay. We do get imported timber sometimes. This is a part of a Roman barrel cask from the Alps. It's silver fir, and it's from a 600 or 700 year old great big silver fir like this, growing right up to the sky. They used to split that stuff up to make basically Retsina in Germany on the Rhine, and then the Roman Londoners used to get drunk on that stuff. And we find the casks reused as well linings, and you find even more bungs. And these casks were big, they were that tall and that wide. They had a whole ton of wine in them, so every time you find a bung, that's equivalent to a ton of wine. Archaeologists are always digging up pottery, because they've got nothing better to do, but some of them anyway. But well, this has its uses, but when they dig up a Roman amphora, they're digging up, a little vessel like that. That's how much wine they're digging up. When you find one of these, or better still, just a bung, that equals 1 ton, 1 metric ton of wine. So it's where we get the ton from, by the way. So there we go. That's silver fir. That's
Is the grain very close together on that fir?
Yep.
Looks it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now there is some of this is larch.
Yes. Yeah.
Some of that is larch as well. Sometimes the casts are even mixed species, but it's all coming from high up. They're made into casts. You can just see some faint axe marks across there.
So that'll be sort of alpine, probably.
Oh, high Alps, high alpine, and they're cleft up in batches.
Yeah.
Bound together, taken down in barges to the Rhineland where they're filled.
Yeah.
And as pine tar or pine resin is used to seal them, I imagine they put it in hot, roll the cast around, it fills any gas, and it will also flavour the wine.
Yeah.
So it is a Retsina type wine.
Retsina,
and they talk about resinated wines, and it's not a big surprise. We get stamps on them. We're trying to source where the vineyards are, and but it's not very far.
It must help
really.
with preservation, I think.
It probably does, except softwood tends to survive quite well underground, waterlogged.
No, I meant of the wine.
Sorry, yeah.
No, actually it keeps the
So
wine
that-
preservation.
That in itself is anything up to 2,000 years old, that piece.
A bit less than that, but just under 2,000. Yeah. I didn't bring any
Well, they're
prehistoric
up to
with me.
2,000, that's close enough.
That's close enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. They're all mixed dates here. This is nearly 2,000 as well. This is 128 split probably. This is oak fencing, oak pale fencing from the Roman period. Want to look how close? Now it has shrunk a little bit, but only about a centimetre in width. We're digging 2 sites at the moment where the preservation is fantastic. It's like Pompeii. We're just about to start. We're digging small areas at the moment. They're called enabling works, where the shoring's going in. We were going to have a public viewing platform on one of them, but apparently that's been banned now. We're right in the middle of the city, where there's a dumped in and filled in valley called the Walbrook. And literally you get fences made of this stuff, standing upright, up to this high, still preserved in situ from the Roman period. So you can stand on the Roman alleyway, peep into the backyard. Well, you wouldn't have been able to or you wouldn't have been able to. You might tip it standing on toes, because when we find them falling over, they're about that tall. The average Roman Londoner, woman's down here, a man's about that tall. They're quite short, on average. We know that because we dug up lots of bodies. Again, very slow grown oak there.
It's like a roofing
Can we
shingle
handle
now.
It does, yeah. And if they break, these are things from spoil heaps. The museum doesn't.
That's like you.
Very
modern
difficult to get
equivalent of a
museums to
closed-wall
keep.
fence, then.
They're not shiny, they're not pottery, they're not metal.
I think
This
it's
is why you don't know anything about
isn't
them.
it?
But is it also quite difficult to keep? How long will that
It's
last?
expensive. Well, this will last a long time. But if they want to preserve it properly, to stop a lot of the splitting happening, then they've got to impregnate it in a water-soluble wax normally, and then they freeze dry it. That bulks up the vessels, and that's expensive. So I would never advocate keeping everything, but I would like them to keep a bit more than they do, so people can see it.
Tell me,
They do in other countries. They manage.
have you
it
ever
somewhere.
come across instances where they did anything other than radial splitting?
What you mean in terms of cleaving?
Yeah.
Well, there's lots of different ways of cleaving, but they do.
But have you ever found, was it?
What they do
They
well with small
experiment.
trees, they with trees up to, I mean, depending on the quality of the tree as well, they'll often do both. So if you've got a big sort of wildwood oak like that 250 years old or 200 years old, that sort of size, they'll make boards with the bottom. Say in the early medieval period, they'll make boards with the bottom, probably in the Roman period as well. And then the next length up, if they're in the later medieval period or Roman period, they might turn that into a bulk for sawing, where they square up the bulk first and then saw it. And then the log above that, they might hew just as one beam. You'll see this in France today. They'll divide the logs into 3 sections. They'll cleave the bottom for barrel staves. The saw log is the next one, and the one on above that is a beam.
So because the quality varies as you go up the front.
Yes, exactly. And if you're in a period where they don't use any sawing, like the Saxon period right up until the sort of Angevin period about 1180, then they'll radially cleave the bottom, and then they'll just cleave the logs in half above that point.